I just wanted to talk a little bit about my favourite topic, which is using data in building people. So I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to pose, just reflective questions. What benefits do you get when you assess people? Now, typically, trainers and HR people alike are looking at, broadly, 3 areas. They're looking at their basic priorities. You know, do we have compliance with our regulatory obligations? Can we prove it? They're also interested in knowing, are we meeting our organisational goals, our professional skills, up to date, modernised? Are we ready for the future? We're also interested in people, and especially at an HR conference, we're very keen in engaging people. We all know that if we are trying to develop people, the way we engage them is actually to show that they're getting benefits from the training we deliver. How is this training building me as a person? How is it adding to my career? That's the key priority that's going to make the difference between something being engaging and not. I mean, you know, we're commissioned to do training all the time, and people say, make it engaging, by which they mean put flashy stuff on it. Look, between you and me, yeah, we'll do it, and we'll smile, and we'll say, yeah, that's engaging. It's not. What's engaging is saying, this is going to benefit you. People are engaged when they're doing something that's got a point to it. And yet, despite those 2 priorities at the bottom being really the key ones that make a difference to whether this training has value to the trainee and to the organisation, which of those are the things that you use data for? And I bet almost everybody in the room is going to say basic priorities. If that's true, raise your hand. Okay, I'm glad to see that. But most organisations are focused very much on collecting data that complies with regulations. So then the next question that comes from that is, what could you do if you had access to more information about the people that you're training? I'm not just talking about what they do in the classroom or what they do on the LMS. I'm talking about combining that with what they do on the job, what they brought to the training, what skills they were able to demonstrate at the time you hired them. Yes, you've got some of that information, but you don't combine it necessarily in many organisations with the information you're getting when you train people. You're not putting that stuff together, putting the picture together to improve the training you deliver. And so my question to you is, why is that? There's actually a technological reason. If we look as an example at the way people learn, I like to give the example of my son. When I ask him to cook dinner, he's 29, he runs off to his room, but he comes back clutching one of these. And he's got it open on a YouTube, and this is actually literally what happens. He then follows the recipe on the YouTube, and I tell you what, my son's a pretty good cook. He actually has got a qualification in it, and he cooks a pretty mean dinner. Did a great roast on the weekend. Got my mum over, had a ball. Sorry we didn't invite you. But anyway, it was followed by this marvellous lemon pie. Anyway, but The point is that people who are in their 20s and 30s have grown up with technologies that weren't available to my generation. And we're not capturing that information well. Your LMS probably has very limited visibility of anything somebody captures or anything somebody does on a YouTube. If they go and study something on a YouTube, I bet you don't see it. And I bet you don't see anything they gain from looking at an app. I bet all the information that those machines you can see around this room, people using, those machines have got computers in it. We talk about the Internet of Things. They're collecting information. I bet you don't have visibility of that. But I'd like you to think for a minute. What could you do with it? If, for example, you're training somebody to use a tool, if that tool can measure the error rate, the mistakes that somebody makes when using it, before training them and after training, just think what that can do. One of the holy grails of training has been measuring its ROI. Training gets deprioritized. It's always one of those things that we think of as discretionary spending, because we can't prove that it's got value. Yet, if we can show that a deterioration in the error rate of something or improvement in customer satisfaction is correlated with training we deliver, then not only can we show that that training's got value, but we can do things like A/B testing to find out how to improve the value we get from training, how to train people better, how to prepare them better. We can do all sorts of things with that sort of information. So the question is, why not? Why don't we do it? And it's to do with an evolution in the way we look at training. Back in the late 90s, so we're talking about more than a quarter of a century ago, industry decided to standardise or training delivery. And they came up with a standard called SCORM. Hands up if you've heard of SCORM. Most people have. The people that designed SCORM, actually, believe it or not, does anyone know? The Pentagon, ADL, a group within the Pentagon called ADL, developed SCORM as a mechanism for capturing information about training. And back in the 90s, it was these four things that we wanted to capture. Can anyone tell me why we weren't capturing information about whether somebody watched a video? You couldn't broadcast a video on the internet. You couldn't broadcast it. Can you imagine why it was SCORM doesn't have any facility for mobile apps? Answer's obvious. Didn't exist. We didn't have smartphones. It's that old. In fact, I don't know if we have any other IT systems with standards that are a quarter of a century old. And something I like to point out when I go into universities is, did you know your standard is older than your students? Because they weren't born when SCORM was developed. It was developed for a different world. But the same team, ADL, Pentagon, actually not as recently as you might think, back in 2013, decided to develop something that does take all of these things into account. They did not propose scrapping SCORM, and nor do I. SCORM is great. It's just one part of a bigger picture. So SCORM will continue to exist. You will still run e-learning, you will still run tests, but you will combine that data with other things. And the way that that's done, according to the standards, this is not our product, this is a standard, is XAPI. Has anyone heard of the term XAPI before? Interesting, isn't it? I asked the question about SCORM and the hands go up. And I was at a conference like this one in Washington, DC, just before COVID. Same question was asked of the room. Half the hands went up for, we are using XAPI already. That was before COVID. It's actually been very big overseas. It's just that this part of the world hasn't had anyone talking about it. And ADL and the various people that are aficionados of XAPI in North America don't tend to come here. And I identify that as being a bit of an issue. We're a long way behind the 8 ball. Since 2013, the rest of the world has moved on. Not deleting SCORM, but augmenting SCORM with XAPI, sometimes called Zappy, and it had an old name once upon a time called Tin Can. Don't worry about it. It was just craziness. Anyway, they called it Tin Can once, but XAPI is the term that you should use, and it combines all sorts of things. Now, how does it work? This is an example of an XAPI system in place. If you imagine 3 or as many systems as you like, each reporting events. And every time somebody does something with a tool or a learning platform or a device, that device is set up to say, something just happened. Here's an event. And we collect those messages and report on them. Pretty simple. The best ideas are. XAPI is actually pretty simple. That's the way it works. Some terminology for you, just because if you get into this, and you ought to, because I tell you what, there's a matter of time before your systems no longer support something that is 1/4 of a century old. How many other tools have you got that still do? You're lucky that your LMS still does, but anyway. Some terminology. Those things that you set up to report messages, we call them learning record providers, or LRPs. The thing that collects those statements, we call a learning record store, LRS. Bad name. Sounds so much like LMS, it confuses everybody. Please remember, an LRS and an LMS have very little in common. One launches courses, the other one collects information from the world. LRS. And the statements themselves we call XAPI. Okay. So far, so good. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how some real-life organisations have applied this and what they've done. This is the bit that I hope knocks some socks off. It's pretty exciting. The first one is Australian, and I was directly involved. Central Queensland University. 65,000 students, learning in all of these ways, as students do now. However, Central Queensland University, like every other university, had this level of visibility. So what they did is put XAPI in and started gathering data from all of these various sources. But what do they do with it? Look for patterns. There's a lot of data. There's currently over 400 million statements in the Central Queensland University XAPI database. Almost 500 million records. And their little AI tool is going, buzzing through, looking for patterns and saying, students that used our tools in this way ended up getting this result sometime later. So future students that look like that, we now can predict what their future results might look like, and unlike every university in the country other than CQU, who measure those students once a year or maybe twice a year at the exams, at the end of a course when it's too late to help the student. I mean, it's like driving with your eyes on the rear view mirror. You examine them when it's too late to actually make a difference. How insane is that? Yet CQU is able to say this student needs help now, they're doing fine, but they won't. Put that in an industrial context. We need this result in the future. Now is the time to make the change. What about Visa? Visa Academy had an entirely different need. Anyone got a system that looks a bit like this with a whole lot of disconnected bits and bobs that don't talk to each other? And has anyone ever asked what would it cost to collect the data from them all? By integration? A fortune. So what did they do? They didn't try and do that. Instead, they put XAPI in the centre, told all those, send your data to our XAPI source, no need to integrate anything. And then they started looking at them, and some of these were silent. Some of them weren't sending any messages. Guess what? They figured these aren't being used. All these old legacy systems that they'd left there because they didn't know, oh, can we turn it off, what would happen? Suddenly, XAPI tells them this system saved them a fortune. Didn't cost them, it saved them a fortune. So have another look at, the other thing, of course, they get a single reporting platform. Those students who prefer LinkedIn Learning as their mode of training, now they can be assessed on an equal footing with those students who prefer Workday as their tool of learning. They want to get in and try it. They can allow students to prefer their own form of training delivery, and they can be assessed no matter what on an equal footing. Another one that I was directly involved is Moody's Analytics. Anyone heard of Moody's? If you ever look at the economic report about Australia's credit rating, AA or AAA, it's issued by Standard & Poor's or Moody's. Big organisation, they rate companies and they rate countries. And one of the things they do as well is offer a service where they offer training videos around the world, but they wanted to know how engaging those videos are. Because in some parts of the world, the internet is pretty lousy. I'm talking about Australia. And mainly. No, seriously, places that don't have good quality video or places where access to the equipment is poor, what impact does that have on people's engagement? I think we've gone, yeah. So to do that, they started taking their YouTubes and collecting XAPI data. And they can measure all sorts of things about the way the videos are being used. What sort of resolution are people playing them at? What sort of speeds? Did they pause them? Did they rewind them? Did they give up halfway through? Has anyone ever offered video training in an organisation and wanted to know, did people really watch it? I wish I had $1 for every time I'd been asked that question. And now you know the reason you can't, why your vendor says no, can't help you. It's because it's SCORM. You're using an LMS that predates videos. And those videos have introduced subsequently concepts like paused, played, rewound, which are all baked into XAPI but not SCORM. So when next time your vendor says, no, I can't tell you whether people just fast forwarded through the video, go and ring somebody that can offer you XAPI. Not only that, XAPI is designed to be expandable in the future. So if Moody's ever wants to measure something that we don't know about now, XAPI is designed to make it really easy to add new measures. It won't date. And I love to offer people an example. If you want to try XAPI, go right ahead, scan this QR code and you'll see a video playing. And I want you to skip, pause, rewind, muck around. Further down the slide, you will see XAPI catching those activities. It will ask you for a name. You can put in Fred the Frog if you want. You're not logging into a system. Big difference. At the moment, you have to pay for a user to train them on your LMS. Every user needs to log in. I'm not giving you a password. XAPI does not require you to log into a system. It can work just on the environment. You're just watching a YouTube and we're capturing the XAPI. Better yet, scroll further down and you'll see a histogram. It shows the color coding of which bits of that video somebody actually watched, where they got most value, where they are struggling. How would that help you to implement continuous improvement? And best of all, what you've got there I can give you free of charge. XAPI is not a big expense. It's so much simpler. LMSs require all sorts of features. They have to be able to manage courses, they have to launch courses, they have to report, they have to capture data. XAPI doesn't. It just sits there and listens. It's a simpler system and costs very little, and most people initially implement it for nothing. They'd probably pay a little bit more if they want to go big. Okay, so I've just got some takeaways. One of the things I like to say is that when we try to do one size fits all, it doesn't fit. You're used to that from shopping, I guess, but it's true in HR and training as well. If we try and have staff development that works for everyone, let me tell you it's going to work for no one. That's why CQU are personally trying to help individuals. That's why Visa are trying to let people choose the platform of preference. That's why Caterpillar, the manufacturer of trucks, have made those trucks XAPI aware so their mechanics can be assessed not in a classroom but when they actually service the truck as to whether they got the job right. By the way, they saved $7 billion in reduced error. $7 billion. It's a big company, Caterpillar. So this is how we help. Our job is to advise people on this. It's something that you will be doing, matter of when you want to get the value. And we offer those sorts of services. I would invite, I've got 5 minutes left, and I'd invite you, if anyone's got any questions about this, to ask them now. If not, thank you very much for your attendance. There are some brochures going around, I know. Thank you very much indeed for your time.